So I wanted to record this episode while this is fresh and I feel like sharing this message. And I think that's one of the big things with the podcast is not necessarily having consistent uploads, but recording episodes when the inspiration's there, because I think that's the easiest for me to communicate, and that's kind of when it just naturally flows. So just left the gym. It's still only like 8 in the morning, and that's why the video looks the way it does. But one of the thoughts that I had is, for the past 2 months or so of life, so this would be October, November, and into December, so I guess 3 months of 2022, I really haven't worked out. Very minimal, if not at all. Like the last time I think I worked out was like mid-September, looking at like the app that we use to track workouts at the CrossFit gym. And my body reflects it, about 15 or so pounds heavier than I was. The endurance isn't there, both cardiovascularly and muscular wise. Like before, you could do push-ups not consistently, but longer sets or more reps per set, and now it's not even close, and it's frustrating. And it brings to mind a thought or just an interesting comparison. So in 2015 or 2016, I went through a breakup, and I spent a lot of time hunting in the fall. I hunted every weekend. And it's just very interesting as you get older how much there's really only a few core principles of life and how they pretty much apply to anything. Of course, you can always get lucky once or twice. But it's very hard to be a consistent high performer in anything. And hunting is just a very good example because it's not really an athletic pursuit. It's not it's a hobby, really. And obviously there are professional hunters and sponsored hunters out there. I'm not one of them. But the interesting parallel was in the prior falls, like 2015 or 2014, 2013, I didn't really hunt consistently. I would maybe go out once a month. And so my skills weren't that good. I didn't practice shooting my bow. I didn't practice, setting it. We had what's called climbing tree stands. So there's a couple different types of tree stands. There's obviously the big, like, fort-looking ones that look kind of like a cabin in the tree. They're built out of wood or what have you, and plywood. They're permanent. They're pretty much there all the time. There's also permanent hang-on stands that you set up and just climb up there and sit in them. Then there's climbing stands, which are stands you set up each time, and you kind of use it to get yourself up the tree. So with that, I never practiced setting up the climbing stand a lot, which they make noise when you set them up. You're wrapping cables around the tree, there's two pieces, you're getting those off. You're walking through the woods with it, so they kind of clink together. There's straps to kind of keep them together so they don't clank when you're walking, but it's still, it's not perfectly quiet. And usually I was someone that you typically hunted first thing in the morning. So you usually got into the woods around 4:30. We're up in the tree by like 5 or 5:30, and then daylight started around 6:30. This was in Ohio, so it's a little bit further north, and it gets lighter later and darker earlier. But I usually hunted in the morning. And so when you're walking through the woods in the middle of the night, it's eerily silent. There's nothing. And so anything you do makes noise, and it's extremely loud relative to the surrounding environment. If you're at a rock concert making that kind of noise, it's dead silent. No one's really going to hear it because it's the environment you're in. But when you're walking through the woods in the middle of the night, the surrounding environment's quiet. There's nothing moving. And so anything you do causes disturbance. And so because I didn't go out consistently and practice the things that are needed to be a good hunter, I never got anything. This went on for, I think, 2, maybe 3 years or so. But in that fall, it's either 15 or 16, I really don't remember at this point, was the first time I went out consistently. From opening weekend till Thanksgiving week end, I went out every Saturday. First thing in the morning. I hunted in my cousin's backyard. They had several acres in northeast Ohio, and I went out, rain or shine, didn't matter the weather, and didn't matter if my cousin was going with me. I went out by myself sometimes. And over that course, the skills got better and better. And they were just incremental, climbing the stand. I could get in the stand much quicker, much quieter, because I just knew what to do and knew what not to do. There was a point in mid-season where I shot at a buck and I missed. It went over the top of him. And so you started to learn like the things to do, not to do. And also the biggest thing I learned was confidence in the stand. I'm not necessarily clinically terrified of heights, but they're definitely not something that I seek out and enjoy doing, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not someone who's completely deathly terrified to climb a ladder, and I've done it and I will do it, but it's definitely something that gets the hairs in the back of the neck standing up, if you know what I'm saying. And so climbing a tree stand was one of those things that was like, kind of terrifying, because you're climbing up the tree somewhere between 20 to 30 feet-ish, and you're standing on a small platform that's, just larger than like your 2 feet together in big boots. So there's not a whole lot of room up there. And so the biggest thing I gained through consistency was the confidence to stand on that stand and draw back the bow and shoot. Now, when I first would stand up, it was very slow, and you're almost like hugging the tree, because you're scared. Just the nerves are there. But as the season went on, this was probably the biggest change beyond anything else, beyond entering the woods quietly, getting to the stand quietly, having it, being a better shot with the bow. The biggest thing was the confidence to stand on that stand 20 to 30 feet in the air and not be as terrified of heights, and start to feel more comfortable with that environment. And over the course of the season, lo and behold, because of the consistency, I was able to kill my first ever deer. And it's just a very interesting parallel to life, because this wasn't necessarily a work endeavor. It wasn't a fitness endeavor. It was just a simple hobby for me. And I couldn't enjoy the hobby unless I was consistently putting time into to get better at the hobby. Going out hunting once or twice a year, or once a month, or whatever, it wasn't consistent enough for me to be good to actually have a good experience with the hobby. It was very frustrating, but I wasn't putting in the time in. I was still shaky on the stand. Like I said, all the things: bad with the bow, bad at entering the stand, bad at climbing the tree, all this kind of stuff. But lazy. I wasn't covering my scent. Just doing all sorts of lazy activities that didn't allow me to have a good experience. But that year I was consistent, and I went out every weekend. Didn't matter the weather, didn't matter the temperature. And in fact, the day I killed the deer, it was, I believe it was either Friday or Saturday after Thanksgiving. I know it was Thanksgiving weekend. I just can't remember the day. I think it was Friday. It was a rainy, cold, Midwest, like typical fall. Just one of the days you want to stay inside. 40 degrees, raining, just solid rain. And it's just one of those days, if you know what I'm talking about, if you grew up in the Midwest or have ever been in the Midwest during the fall, you had one of those days, exactly what I'm talking about. And just went out regardless and ended up killing deer right before dusk, or right at dusk. It was very close. And just the very interesting parallels of life. There's really only a few things in life, principles that exist regardless of activity. And consistency is one of them. And consistency in just the smallest of actions. Because in that moment, they seem so dang insignificant. But over the course of time, they really start to add up. And one of the books I'm looking forward to reading this year is Atomic Habits, that breaks that down a little bit further.